Welcome to Biblical History, and this is Art Mokarow, your host, speaking again. We're well along the way in our programs, and we want to present one today that has to do with time. Because time throughout the Bible is a very, very problematic subject. Time, we think that the earth and the universe was made in 7 days, literal days, 24-hour days. Yet we find in the Bible there wasn't even a sun or moon, let alone the solar system, until the fourth day. So that's a problem. What kind of time are we talking about? Scientists, they come up with their ideas and their theories, and they claim, well, the earth is over 13 billion years old. It's 13 billion and a half, I think it is. How can you say it's 13 and a half billion years old, where Einstein tells you very plainly, if you believe in him, that time is relative? If time is relative, how do you know? Well, some say they look into Earth's strata. They call that the phylum, like a file. Earth strata, you have a tertiary period, or you have the, all the different periods of time that are right layered, right in our Earth. You can drive to places that have these limestone cliffs, and they seem to have these strata that are there. The only problem is, throughout the whole world, they're all in chaos. There is no uniform strata. What they think is in one time period does not apply to another. And some literally are crossways. So to use that as a reason is not very reliable. So to use phylum to decide time periods is rather fallacious. And then you got the other end of the scope as well. You've got people who look at time as if that they could go back and measure the carbon dating. It's called carbon dating, right? It means the half-life. It means the amount of carbon in the air, its half-life is every 5,000, roughly 500 years. If there's carbon in the air, it disappears every 5,500 years in half. Well, if that be so, why are we worried about the carbon in the air? Why are we today in the greenhouse approach saying there's too much carbon? It's going to be gone if we believe in carbon dating, right? In 5,500 years, it's going to be gone. Not only that, the irony of believing in this nonsense about that man has put too much carbon in the air. Don't you know what happens when too much carbon gets in the air scientifically? You get global warming. And you say, yeah, that's the problem, global warming. Why is global warming a problem? When things warm up, grass shows. And grass shows, next thing you get is flowers. And then you get trees. And you know what? They give off oxygen. Oxygen, all the plants eat the carbon out of the air, so it's cyclical. So no matter how I want to measure things, if I get involved with the question of science having the right answer, I run into a lot of problems to answer. I recently listened on TV in the History Channel of a woman from England who's a top scientist. And she was asked the question, does man put too much carbon in the air? Top scientists, Nobel winners who got the Nobel Prize, contend that the man has put too much carbon in the air. You know what she did? She said, it's a bunch of malarkey. She went to them. She's from England. In Greenwich Village, she went to those top scientists who claim there's too much carbon in the air. They're the ones who said it. You know what they said? We never said that. We never said that. They said on a computerized basis it shows there's too much carbon in the air. But it doesn't mean that's true. In fact, now we found out that it's only half the amount that we thought it was. There's only 1% instead of 2% carbon. Oh, this is all over time, isn't it? The whole problem is understanding time. And what is time? If you look only to human beings for the answer, you're going to be sadly mistaken. You're going to be in error more than you're going to be in truth. And for us to, we said God is dead after the 60s. Anybody over 30 doesn't know what he's talking about. That's what happened at Woodstock, when they got drunk and full of drugs. And we celebrate that day today as if it was something. And all it was the time to go crazy. Give up their minds and their reason and their thinking. And it's all about time. Well, let's go back to the old favorite, your Bible. What does the Bible show about time? Well, we know in Genesis 1, the word is yom, for day. Day does not mean time. The Apostle Peter said a very striking thing. I want you to see that, what he said, 2 Peter, what he told us about time. Very interesting point. Now, God's going to set it straight right through the book of Peter. No problem, no difficulty. It's all there. It's all plain. Peter was a pretty audacious person. When he spoke, he was pretty certain of himself, he felt. So it was no problem whatsoever for him to speak out. Here we see Peter starts to bring out in 2 Peter 2 that Noah was the 8th preacher of righteousness. Now, what did Noah know? The book of Jude tells us that Enoch was the 7th prophet from God. So either one, we knew that, and it tells us very plainly and clearly. And here in verse 8 of 2 Peter 3, Peter says, "But, beloved, be not ignorant of the one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years." So how God thinks, there's no difference between one day and 1,000 years. And 1,000 years is one day. So it's telling you very clearly that there's more than one way to count time. And the Bible has 3 ways that we have to cover that's going to count time. It's going to cover time, divine time, which you found out could be any kind of time, right? The second we see is to count time from darkness to light, or light to darkness. We call that astral time. And then the third type is earth time, which is 24 hours a day. So there's 3 kinds of times that we have to discuss. So we're now finishing for a break, and we're going to take this break, and when we come back, we're going to dive right in and talk about the 3 kinds of time. Welcome back. We're glad we're together again, and we're ready to proceed on the 3 kinds of time that we found out exists. One is divine time. The second one was astral time, and the third was earthly time, or 24-hour days. In fact, we're going to see God counts one other period of time another way, but we're going to wait till we finish the 3. Then I'm going to put sort of the crown on the top of it and see how it all fits together. Divine time, what is divine time? We get very confused when we read the Bible. Because when you read from Genesis 1 all the way up to the flood, people seem to live for thousands of years. Correct? I mean, they talk about people living thousands of years. Methuselah, he lived almost 1,000 years, Methuselah. Did he? Did Methuselah live for 1,000 years? Truly, I don't know. I don't know. It depends how you're counting the time. Because you see, divine time is eternity. Let's say it again. Divine time is eternity. It's forever. And to God, when he looks at time, all he says is it's eternity. So I'm telling you how God counts time right from the beginning. Time is forever. Forever. That contradicts Einstein. Einstein said time is relative, right? E equal mc squared. He says that energy, E, which is nothing more than a power, right? Energy is a power. He says equals, if you want power, something to make something, energy to do something, to create something, if you want it, it equals M, which is the word mass, and mass has to do with the totality of what composed that mass. If it's a planet, within that planet, it has a specified amount of elements called quantum. Quantum physics is when you take all of the elements that are in that mass, like a planet, all right? C squared. C is light squared. In other words, you're restricted to the speed of light. And that's why in physics, you always measure things according to the speed of light. But you know what they found out recently? Well, if time is relative, they found out recently. Now, I want you to listen to this. They found out that divine time, you can start from one point and something else that's many light years away be there at the same time you started. So the light had nothing to do with it. It just, you started and you were there. And that's why when we read 2 Peter 3, that divine time, God figures time not by a day or 1,000 years, but eternity. Eternity is God's time. That's divine time. Now, Einstein disagrees with that because he says it's relative. But that's only because he's measuring time that's physical, that's created, and that's limited. There's two kinds of ways to study the universe. One is you can study by astronomy, that's its cycle, or the other way is by astrology. You heard of astrology? Do you know that every scientist is an astrologist? And in the Bible, God speaks of astrology as a very bad thing. You know why? Because astrology never ends. It's not eternal time. It's relative. So it's always relative to some other circumstance. There's an old scientist who was called Planck. His name was Planck. It's called the Planck constant. Planck constant means when all time is in perfect harmony and constant. So it's called by the scientist Planck's constant. He was an astrologer. He studies everything by the speed of light. But that's not divine time, is it? Are you following me? It's a big difference. That's why the Hebrew word yom for day is not in eternity. It's whatever you have it to be. It can be relative. It can be relative to day and night. We know in Genesis 1 that's what happened, right? In Genesis 1:1, we read this very clearly and plainly. And God said in verse 3 of Genesis 1, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, if God is time or eternity, then it means God can have no darkness in him, right? Because if he had darkness, he's already restricting time. He's defining a time. That's what's happening. And that's why Peter said it's a day or 1,000 years. And in 1 John 1 and in verse 5, it tells us very simply and clearly that in God there is no darkness. God himself has not the shreddest piece of darkness in him. Only light. There's only light. So God's time is light or divine, and it's eternal. But astral time is dependent on dark and light. So now we know what dark and light is, and then earthly time is what we call 24-hour periods. So those are the 3 periods of light or time. So time is eternity, and all other times are relative. So we certainly hope that you have a grasp. When we're in the Bible talking about time and history, it's all relative. This is Art Mokarow again as your host, welcoming you back for us to continue our time discussion. We have covered that we found out there's 3 times. One is eternal time, which is God, and that's true time, because it means it always continues. And then we found out also then there's astral time. Depends how big a sun is or a planet is, how long it takes the planet to revolve around the sun. And the third kind was earthly time, or 24 hours a day. But now remember, I told you in the beginning, there is a 4th time. And this 4th time, you better grasp this, because this is getting into the meat of the gospel. The 4th way God counts earthly time. Are you hearing me? We're not looking at this from a divine time mode. We're not looking at it from an astral time mode by size of planets and suns. We're looking at it from a standpoint of how God looks as the earthly time, the 24 hours a day, how he counts that earthly time. The 4th way God counts earthly time is by what's called the Jubilee. The Jubilee is a time, this is the beginning of paradise forever and ever, with earth and heaven united as one. This is the conclusion of the whole gospel, when God makes all things new. Let's read about that time in Revelation 21. Very simple, very clear. This is a wonderful time. There's no pain, there's no suffering. Revelation 21 and verse 1, it says, "And I saw a new heaven." The heavens wiped out. But this is just talking about the atmosphere, ionosphere. He said, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth." So all the other was burned out. It's all gone. The lake of fire took care of that. And if you get one of my books on the lake of fire, you'll see it's God himself who's the lake of fire. He's the one who burns everything up. That's the reason he doesn't show himself. You know why he doesn't show himself? If he ever showed himself, we'd all be crisp. We'd be burned up. He can't. So this is a time of a new heaven and new earth for the first, now get it, that first heaven and the first earth that was created in Genesis 1:1 passed away. It's gone. Fini. It's finished. And there was no more sea or ocean. No more oceans. Just lakes, ponds, and rivers and streams. No oceans in this heaven on earth, on this new earth. It's the time of the new heaven and new earth, where God dwells on earth. This is the Garden of Eden restored. It's the gospel, the good news, finally coming to pass. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. You know, if you ever took, in Isaiah 40, they knew at that time that the earth was a circle. Scientists think that the Greeks thought that the earth was flat. No, the earth wasn't flat. It was a circle. The earth was flat, but the world was round. It was circular. Isaiah 40 tells us that, okay, very clearly. In fact, the word in the Hebrew, there where it says the circle, means latitude and longitude. If you took the center from the top axis of the North Pole down to the south, the longitude, and the latitude, they're like a cross, right? And where that cross meets is Jerusalem. Ironic, isn't it? And Christ died on a cross. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. And then it says, so John saw this holy city, but this is a new Jerusalem. The old Jerusalem's wiped out. It's gone. It burned up with the rest. This new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Oh, God's wedding. God gets married. Who does he get married to? He gets married to New Jerusalem. Galatians 4 tells you very plainly. Galatians 4, it says she's the mother of all living. Paul wrote it in the book of Galatians. So this only isn't the time. Christ's marriage is over, isn't it? Didn't he meet his bride before the millennium? Of course he did. The wedding feast happened in this New Jerusalem. They had a party for two. As I call it in my book, if you want to send for it, the two honeymoons. God's honeymoon and Christ's bride's honeymoon. So it goes on and says, then I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold the tabernacle of God. This is the temple. A tabernacle is God's house. Remember, the first one was just a tent that Moses carried around. It was a tabernacle. Is with men. So God dwells on earth. We don't stay in heaven. Heaven and earth are united. Read the Lord's Prayer. That's what it says. It says it. And he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death. Why? Because it's all burned up. All flesh is gone. Sin has been taken care of. The problem is our flesh. Neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. For what? For the former things are passed away. Everything that has to do with physics is gone. Only spirit existence is left. Spirit. And he that sat upon the throne said, here's what God says, behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, write, for these words are true and faithful. So Leviticus 25 is the chapter that covers the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year happens every 50 years. Remember I told you earth time, God counts every 50 years? What he means, he's telling you that it's the 50th year, the Jubilee, when God sets everybody's debts aside. They're forgiven. And all the original owners of property goes back to the owner who made it. So everything goes back to God, and that's the Jubilee year. So now you're talking about the fourth period of time, the time of the Jubilee of joy and happiness in eternity forever and ever. And I want you all to have a wonderful time and a blessed time, and may God be with you all.